Sophie, you said after game 5, I got a lot on my mind.
Oh boy.
What particularly, in what direction was your mind racing at that juncture?
I mean, everywhere. And I'm going to be good today. I am, because I'm just tired of our league. They need to step up and be better. Our leadership from top to bottom needs to be held accountable. I think that there are a lot of people in the position of powers in the WNBA who they might be really great business people, but they don't know shit about basketball. And that's got to change. I said I was going to be good and I just messed up.
The WNBA is on fire right now, but not just because of its rising stars or record-breaking ratings. Beneath the highlight reels and sellout arenas, there's a storm brewing that could rip the league apart. Players aren't just frustrated, they're fed up. And for the first time in years, they're saying it out loud, with no filters, no polished quotes, just raw truth. One star's interview turned into a rallying cry. Another called league leadership the worst in the world. And together, they've sparked something the commissioner never saw coming, a full-on revolt. But how did it get to this point? How did one of the fastest-growing leagues in the world suddenly find itself staring down the possibility of a lockout? And what role did rising stars like Caitlin Clark play in pushing this movement to the breaking point? The answers reveal a story bigger than basketball, one about power, leadership, and a fight for respect that's been boiling under the surface for years. It started with whispers, the kind of frustration players usually kept behind locker room doors. Missed calls, reckless fouls, and a league office that seemed more concerned with press releases than player safety. But then the dam broke. Napheesa Collier, one of the WNBA's brightest stars, didn't hold back. In her exit interview, she looked straight at the cameras and said what no one else dared. League leadership wasn't just flawed, it was the worst in the world. No coded language, no softened words. Just a direct shot at Commissioner Cathy Engelbert and the way the league was being run. Her message was clear. This wasn't about one tough season or a bad game. This was about systemic failure. Players were performing at historic levels, bringing in record audiences, yet the people in charge weren't protecting the product or the players putting their bodies on the line every night. And just when Collier's words were still echoing across social media, Sophie Cunningham stepped up and doubled down. She didn't just call it out, she called it personal. Her frustration wasn't just about business deals or media spin. It was about the game itself. The basketball that fans tuned in to see being ruined by officiating blunders and reckless play. The fact that two stars from different corners of the league were suddenly saying the same thing lit up fans, media, and players alike. This wasn't venting anymore. This was a movement taking shape. But frustration alone doesn't topple leadership. What came next showed just how deep the cracks really were. When a commissioner faces criticism from players, the response matters. It can calm the storm, or it can add fuel to the fire. In Cathy Engelbert's case, her response did the latter. Instead of addressing officiating meltdowns, dangerous levels of physical play, or the growing chorus of player distrust, Engelbert delivered what sounded like a pre-written press release. Polite words about progress, growth, and passion for the game, but nothing about the real issues players risk their careers over every night. To Collier and Cunningham, that silence was louder than anything she said. When players begged for accountability, they got spin. When they demanded solutions, they got PR. And when they looked to their commissioner for leadership, they got someone who seemed more concerned about protecting an image than protecting the league. For fans, the disconnect was just as obvious. They saw the injuries piling up. They saw games slowed down by inconsistent officiating. They saw stars like Caitlin Clark and A'ja Wilson carrying the league to new heights, only to watch leadership stumble when it mattered most. The message was clear. The league didn't succeed because of its leadership. It succeeded in spite of it. And that's the kind of disconnect that no amount of polished interviews can fix. And once the media caught wind of that gap between players and leadership, the story blew up far beyond the league itself. Once the players spoke out, it didn't stay inside the locker room. The story exploded into the mainstream, and suddenly the WNBA's leadership crisis was being debated on national television. Stephen A. Smith didn't mince words. On ESPN's biggest stage, he called Engelbert's response weak, even suggesting her job should be on the line. Scott Van Pelt followed up, hammering the same point. Leadership has failed to meet the moment. These weren't fringe voices. They were some of the most respected names in American sports media, and they were siding with the players. And fans noticed. Social media lit up with hashtags, threads, and clips dissecting every angle of Collier's and Cunningham's words. The criticism was no longer limited to message boards or niche basketball blogs. It was plastered across trending pages, TikTok debates, and primetime sports shows. Even legends of the game chimed in. Lisa Leslie, one of the most iconic figures in WNBA history, called out the leadership gap herself. A'ja Wilson, the reigning MVP, spoke about players not being heard. These weren't isolated frustrations anymore. It was a movement that stretched across generations of players. Instead of putting out the fire, Engelbert's dismissive PR tone made the flames leap higher. And with media magnifying every word, the story was no longer just about basketball, it was about credibility. Because when stars, legends, and national commentators all say the same thing, the message is undeniable. The league's leadership isn't just out of touch, it might be collapsing. But if media pressure exposed the cracks, it was Sophie Cunningham's next move that turned those cracks into a full-blown earthquake. Most exit interviews are safe. A quick thank you to teammates, some polite words about next season, and it's done. But Sophie Cunningham wasn't interested in playing that game. She sat down, looked straight into the cameras, and said what everyone had been whispering. "I'm just tired of our league." That one line hit harder than any stat sheet. It wasn't bitterness after a bad season. It was exhaustion, players risking their bodies night after night, only to be led by people who, as Sophie bluntly put it, don't even know basketball. She wasn't alone either. Her words captured what countless players had been feeling. Games weren't just physical, they were unsafe. Officials weren't just inconsistent, they were losing control. Basketball wasn't fun to play, and for fans, it wasn't fun to watch. For Cunningham, it wasn't about one superstar like Caitlin Clark being mistreated, it was about everyone. From rookies battling for minutes to veterans anchoring franchises, players were fed up with a system that ignored them. And then came the line that sent shockwaves through the league. "We aren't going to play until they give us what we deserve." That wasn't a soundbite. It was a threat, a lockout hanging in the air. Sophie wasn't just frustrated, she was making it clear that players were ready to risk everything if leadership didn't change. Fans erupted online, praising her for saying what others were too cautious to admit. Her blunt honesty turned frustration into a rallying cry. Suddenly, this wasn't just Collier's fight, it was a league-wide rebellion. And for the first time, the commissioner wasn't in control of the future. The players were. But Cunningham's bold warning wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Because what came next put the league's very survival on the line. Talk of frustration was one thing. Talk of unsafe play, bad officiating, and clueless leadership was another. But when Sophie Cunningham openly said players might not take the floor again until they get what they deserve, everything changed. This wasn't idle talk, it was a direct warning that the WNBA could be headed for a lockout. And with the 2026 CBA negotiations looming, that possibility suddenly felt very real. For players, this wasn't about greed or chasing bigger checks. It was about survival. Years of piling injuries, unchecked physicality, and leadership brushing off their concerns had reached a breaking point. The league was making money. New TV deals were signed, team valuations were soaring, and sponsors were lining up. Yet the players, the ones actually carrying the product, were still being told to be grateful for scraps. Fans saw through it. They knew Caitlin Clark, A'ja Wilson, and Sabrina Ionescu were driving ratings, not league executives. They knew the players were the ones creating the highlights, selling out arenas, and building momentum. And now, those same players were threatening to walk away unless they were heard. The lockout threat wasn't just leverage, it was the players taking back power. For decades, the narrative was that women's basketball should feel lucky to exist at all. But this new generation wasn't buying that. Cunningham, Collier, Wilson, and others were telling the world that they weren't disposable. And here's the kicker. If they follow through, the league risks derailing its biggest growth window in history. The timing couldn't be worse for leadership, and players know it. But there was still one name hanging over everything. A player so big that leadership tried to use her as a shield. And when the truth about Caitlin Clark's role came out, fans realized this fight wasn't about one star, it was about the entire league. Whenever controversy hits the WNBA, Caitlin Clark's name seems to hover in the background. She's the face of a new era, a ratings agnet, and a sponsor's dream. Naturally, league leadership tried to spin the revolt as just Clark drama. But Sophie Cunningham wasn't about to let that narrative take over. Yes, Clark is important. She draws in massive TV audiences, fills arenas, and sparks debates across social media. But Cunningham made it clear, this fight isn't just about Caitlin. It's about every player grinding through the same dangerous officiating, the same neglect, the same leadership failures. She called out the reality that many fans already suspected. Clark's endorsements, Nike, State Farm, Gatorade, were secured long before she set foot in the WNBA. They weren't gifts from league leadership, and they certainly weren't proof of Engelbert's success. The commissioner taking credit for Clark's rise was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. By broadening the fight, Cunningham flipped the narrative. She reminded everyone this wasn't about one star being mistreated, it was about a system that put all players at risk. From rookies fighting for recognition to veterans like A'ja Wilson carrying franchises, the message was simple. The league can't survive on PR spin. It survives because of the players. And once fans understood that, support for the movement skyrocketed. Suddenly, it wasn't just justice for Clark. It was respect for everyone who puts on a jersey. But if Clark's presence showed the world what was at stake, the bigger picture revealed something even more explosive. Leadership wasn't just failing players, it was failing the future of the league itself. On paper, the WNBA looks unstoppable. Team valuations are climbing. A record-breaking media deal worth billions is locked in. Sponsors are finally lining up the way players have begged for years. From the outside, it looks like the league is finally getting the respect it deserves. But inside, it's a different story. Players see the money flowing in, yet their salaries remain capped at a fraction of what men earn. They watch highlight reels go viral, but they don't see that growth translated into better protections, safer games, or leadership that actually listens. That contradiction is what makes this moment so dangerous. You can't market growth while ignoring the voices of the people responsible for it. You can't brag about billion-dollar deals while telling players to be grateful for scraps. And you definitely can't celebrate historic fan engagement while letting the product on the court get dragged down by officiating disasters and mounting injuries. Fans feel it too. They aren't tuning in for executives or PR spin, they're here for the players. They want to see Caitlin Clark hitting logo threes, A'ja Wilson dominating the paint, and Sophie Cunningham battling on the perimeter. But if the players walk away, all that momentum evaporates overnight. That's the real risk. The WNBA isn't fighting for survival against ratings or sponsors anymore, it's fighting against itself. And unless leadership changes course, the league could waste the most exciting growth window in its history. Which brings us to the final question. With players, fans, and even legends calling for change, can the WNBA fix this crisis before it destroys its own future? The revolt inside the WNBA didn't start with one bad call or one rough season. It started with years of frustration finally boiling over. Napheesa Collier struck the first match. Sophie Cunningham poured gasoline on it. And now, the fire has spread to every corner of the league. The message is loud and clear. The players are done being ignored. They're done risking their bodies while executives hand out polished press releases. They're done carrying the league on their shoulders without real respect or accountability in return. Fans have taken sides, and it's not with the commissioner. From social media threads to national TV debates, the consensus is the same. Leadership has failed. The WNBA is growing not because of its executives, but because of its players. And those players are no longer afraid to say it. That leaves the league at a crossroads. On one side, the biggest growth window in its history, massive TV deals, soaring ratings, new fans around the world. On the other, a potential lockout that could derail everything. The choice comes down to whether leadership is willing to listen, adapt, and put players first. Because here's the truth. The WNBA doesn't succeed. Despite its stars, it succeeds because of them. And if leadership keeps ignoring that, the league risks losing more than games. It risks losing trust, momentum, and the very players who built it. So now the question isn't whether change is coming. The question is, who survives it? Will the commissioner step aside? Will players take full control of their future? Or will the league stumble at the exact moment it should be soaring? One thing is certain. The next chapter of the WNBA won't be written in boardrooms. It'll be written by the players who refuse to stay silent any longer. The revolt inside the WNBA didn't start with one bad call or one rough season. It started with years of frustration finally boiling over. Napheesa Collier struck the first match. Sophie Cunningham poured gasoline on it. And now, the fire has spread to every corner of the league. The message is loud and clear. The players are done being ignored. They're done risking their bodies while executives hand out polished press releases. They're done carrying the league on their shoulders without real respect or accountability in return. Fans have taken sides, and it's not with the commissioner. From social media threads to national TV debates, the consensus is the same. Leadership has failed. The WNBA is growing not because of its executives, but because of its players. And those players are no longer afraid to say it. That leaves the league at a crossroads. On one side, The biggest growth window in its history, massive TV deals, soaring ratings, new fans around the world. On the other, a potential lockout that could derail everything. The choice comes down to whether leadership is willing to listen, adapt, and put players first. Because here's the truth. The WNBA doesn't succeed despite its stars, it succeeds because of them. And if leadership keeps ignoring that, the league risks losing more than games. It risks losing trust, momentum, and the very players who built it. So now the question isn't whether change is coming. The question is who survives it. Will the commissioner step aside? Will players take full control of their future? Or will the league stumble at the exact moment it should be soaring? One thing is certain, the next chapter of the WNBA won't be written in boardrooms. It'll be written by the players who refuse to stay silent any longer.